What if you could wage war on a desert and win? What if a nation, pushed to the brink by an unforgiving climate, decided to commit the ultimate act of defiance against nature itself? We're not talking about planting a few trees or building a new dam. We're talking about a project of such staggering ambition, it sounds like science fiction. Imagine flooding an area larger than many European countries, forging a new sea in the heart of a continent, and permanently altering the climate of a landmass the size of the United States. This isn't a fantasy. This is the story of Australia's $200 billion gamble, a plan to create its own Mediterranean in the middle of its vast, sun-scorched outback. It's a century-old dream that refuses to die, a ghost of engineering past that has been secretly resurrected with futuristic technology. But this grand vision walks a razor's edge between salvation and self-destruction. Would creating this see save a continent from its greatest fear, catastrophic drought, or would it unleash an ecological nightmare from which there is no return? We are about to dive deep into one of the most audacious and controversial engineering proposals in human history. The science, the politics, and the profound ethical questions are mind-boggling. If you believe in pushing the limits of what's possible and exploring the grandest ideas humanity has ever conceived, do yourself a favor and subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Because the story you are about to hear will change the way you look at the world map forever. To truly understand this colossal ambition, we must first journey back in time. Not just 100 years, but 100 million years. Because what many Australians don't realize is that this audacious plan isn't about creating something entirely new. It's an unconscious echo of a lost world. During the Cretaceous period, a vast shallow ocean known as the Eromanga Sea covered 1/3 of the continent. This was a real-life Jurassic Park meets the blue planet. Its waters teemed with monstrous marine reptiles, kronosaurs, the T-Rex of the ocean, with teeth the size of bananas, and long-necked plesiosaurs gliding through the ancient currents. Giant ammonites, coiled like colossal nautiluses, drifted through this primeval sea. In a sense, the dreamers of a modern inland sea weren't inventors. They were revivalists, attempting to resurrect a ghost, to restore a water world that nature itself had already built and then reclaimed. Fast forward to the 19th century. European explorers, raised on tales of great inland rivers in Africa and America, ventured into Australia's searing red heart, convinced they would find its liquid center, a vast lake or river system. Men like Charles Sturt pushed through unimaginable hardship, chasing mirages and mapping a continent of dust. Instead of a life-giving sea, they found an endless expanse of desert and salt pans, a landscape so alien and hostile that Sturt wrote in his journal, "It felt as if some great convulsion had torn these regions asunder." The dream of a watery interior seemed to die right there, in the shimmering heat. But it didn't. The idea was too powerful, too seductive. It merely went dormant, waiting for its champion. That champion arrived in the form of John Bradfield, the EII, undisputed Einstein of Australian engineering. Fresh from his triumph of designing and building the iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge, Bradfield was a national hero, a man who built symbols of progress and possibility. In the 1930s, with Australia in the grip of the Great Depression, he unveiled a plan so bold it captured the nation's imagination. His vision, which would become known as the Bradfield Scheme, was breathtaking in its scope. He proposed to harness the immense power of Queensland's tropical north, where monsoon rains dump trillions of litres of water, most of which simply flows out to sea. Bradfield planned to redirect these floodwaters using a monumental network of dams, tunnels bored through mountains, and thousands of kilometers of canals. The destination? The Lake Eyre Basin, a colossal natural depression in the continent's center, a point that sits a full 15 meters below sea level. His plan would create a permanent inland sea, a body of fresh water larger than the nation of Belgium. Think of it as Australia's Panama Canal, but instead of connecting two oceans, it would terraform a desert. Bradfield argued his sea would be a climate engine. The vast water body would increase humidity and generate reliable rainfall for hundreds of kilometers, cooling the continent's fiery core, generating immense amounts of hydroelectric power, and creating a new agricultural heartland to rival California's Central Valley. To grasp why Lake Eyre became the focus of this obsession, you need to think of the Australian outback as a gigantic, continental-scale bathtub. The Lake Eyre Basin is the drain. It covers an astonishing 1.2 million square kilometers, or 1/6 of the entire continent. Its lowest point, named Katithanda by its traditional owners, is a geological anomaly. During rare massive flood events, a natural miracle occurs. Water from rivers thousands of kilometers away, like the Diamantina and Cooper Creek, embarks on a slow, epic journey, filling the basin over weeks and months. The parched, salt-crusted wasteland transforms into a shimmering, temporary oasis, teeming with bird life, a fleeting spectacle of life in the dead heart of the continent. But here's the fatal flaw. The basin is endorheic. It's a sealed system. Water flows in, but it never flows out, except through one relentless enemy: evaporation. Bradfield Scheme aimed to overcome this flaw, to turn this temporary miracle into a permanent reality. But to do so, he faced 3 colossal hurdles. First, the sheer volume of water required is almost incomprehensible. To fill Lake Eyre and keep it filled would require an initial 300 cubic kilometers of water. That's the equivalent of pouring 600 Sydney Harbours into the desert. Second, there's that relentless enemy: evaporation. The outback's scorching 40 degrees Celsius summers create an evaporation rate that is 10 times greater than the local rainfall. It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket during a heat wave, with the sun acting as a giant invisible straw, sucking 3 vertical meters of water out of the sea every single year. This would require a perpetual, massive refilling operation forever, fighting a losing battle against the sky. And third, salinity. Even with fresh water, over time, the constant evaporation would leave behind minerals and salts, slowly concentrating them. Without an outlet to flush the system, the lake would inevitably become a hypersaline, sterile chemical soup, a Dead Sea on an even grander scale, poisoning the very land it was meant to revive. For a time, these problems were ignored. In a nation desperate for work and a symbol of hope, the Bradfield Scheme was a political sensation. But by the 1940s, the brutal reality of physics and mathematics could no longer be denied. The project was deemed too expensive, too impractical, and too risky. Then, in the 1960s, the world received a terrifying, real-world lesson in what happens when you tamper with massive water systems. The Soviet Union, in its own quest to create an agricultural paradise, diverted the 2 great rivers that fed the Aral Sea to grow cotton in the desert. The result was one of the worst ecological disasters in human history. The Aral Sea, once the 4th largest lake in the world, shrank by 90%. It left behind a toxic desert of salt and pesticides, creating devastating dust storms that caused respiratory illnesses for hundreds of kilometers around. The fishing fleet was left stranded in a sea of sand, a haunting monument to human hubris. Australia took note. The Aral Sea disaster served as a stark, undeniable warning. The Bradfield Scheme was officially shelved, relegated to the archives as a fascinating but failed dream. But the dream never truly died. And in the 21st century, it has been reborn, supercharged with modern technology. Enter the Inland Sea 2.0. This new proposal, championed by a new generation of engineers and entrepreneurs, addresses the original plan's fatal flaw: the lack of water. Their solution? Don't use fresh water at all. Go directly to the source, the ocean. The plan is to build massive, solar-powered desalination plants along the coast. These plants would pump enormous volumes of seawater 600 kilometers inland through colossal pipelines to fill the Lake Eyre basin. Proponents argue this solves multiple problems at once. First, using salt water dramatically reduces the net evaporation rate, as saltier water evaporates more slowly. Second, the project would be powered by renewable energy, making it a green mega project. They claim it could create its own weather, a lake effect that would bring cooling rains to the parched interior, acting as a buffer against Australia's increasingly brutal droughts, which have been intensified by climate change. The devastating 2019 Black Summer bushfires, which saw entire towns run out of water, brought this urgency into sharp focus. But for every argument in favor, the critics fire back with even greater force. The price tag is astronomical, estimated to be well over $200 billion for the pipelines and pumps alone, before a single drop of water is moved. Then there's the problem of salinity on a catastrophic scale. Deliberately flooding a massive basin with salt water would create a permanent seeping wound in the continent. Salt would leach into the surrounding groundwater, sterilizing millions of hectares of soil forever, rendering any future agriculture impossible. And then there is the ethical dimension, a hurdle far greater than any engineering challenge. The Lake Eyre Basin is not an empty wasteland. It is the ancestral land of the Arabana people, a sacred place at the heart of their culture and spirituality for over 40,000 years. To them, it is Katithanda, a place of profound cultural significance. Woven into their creation stories, their ceremonies, and their songlines, flooding it permanently would be an act of cultural erasure, drowning a history older than the pyramids. So, let's play God for a moment. If this project were greenlit tomorrow, what would actually happen? Here's a speculative timeline. Within the first year, as the pumps thrum to life, the basin would fill to about 30% capacity. A shallow turquoise lake, visible from space, would appear in the red heart of Australia. By year 5, the microclimate effects would begin to register. Weather models predict a potential increase in rainfall of up to 15% within a 100-kilometer radius. Salinity, however, would already be reaching critical levels. By year 10, you might see the first coastline cities springing up. Audacious experiments in desert urbanism, potentially becoming Australia's newest real estate boom. By year 50, the continent would be at a crossroads. The ecosystem would either have collapsed into a hypersaline, biologically dead zone, or, in the most optimistic scenario, it would have stabilized, creating a bizarre but thriving new biosphere, a unique blend of marine and desert life unlike anything else on Earth. There is a precedent for this kind of dramatic geological event. 5 million years ago, the Mediterranean Sea itself almost completely evaporated in an event called the Messinian Salinity Crisis. Then, the Atlantic Ocean burst through the Strait of Gibraltar in a cataclysmic flood, refilling the entire basin in as little as 2 years. The result was an explosion of biodiversity. Could Australia's inland sea trigger a similar renewal? It's possible, but the Mediterranean refilled naturally. This scheme would depend on a fragile, artificial lifeline of pumps and pipelines, a constant, energy-intensive war against entropy. To succeed, engineers would need breakthroughs that are still on the horizon. Imagine next-generation graphene filters that can desalinate water with near-zero energy cost, or a massive salt mining operation that continuously harvests salt from the sea for export, turning a liability into an asset. Imagine self-sufficient, Dubai-style cities rising from the desert shores, powered by vast solar arrays and surrounded by algae farms producing biofuel from the salty water. But the most significant hurdle isn't technology or cost, it is ethics. As Arabana elder Aaron Stewart has powerfully stated, "Our stories are written in this land. You can't drown them." It raises a profound question. Does a nation have the right to sacrifice a sacred, ancient culture for a perceived future gain? It's like demolishing a cathedral to build a factory, claiming the jobs created are worth more than the lost heritage. Ultimately, Australia's Inland Sea project is a Rorschach test for our times. Is it a visionary solution to the existential threat of climate change? A necessary act of planetary engineering? Or is it the peak of human arrogance? A colonialist fantasy of conquering nature that is doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past on a grander scale? The sheer audacity is what keeps the dream alive. As droughts worsen and the continent grows hotter and drier, the debate will inevitably resurface. After all, Australia has a long history of battling nature, and famously, Not always winning, as the Great Emu War humorously reminds us. The inland sea remains a ghost, a whisper of what could be. It forces us to ask a difficult question. At what point does an insane, impossible idea become a necessary one? Should Australia gamble its future on this one colossal Hail Mary pass? Or should it invest those same billions into 1,000 smaller, smarter, more localized solutions? The fate of a continent could hang on the answer.